Hey there, Wall Street winners. I had a comment on one of my videos recently about tariffs, and clearly it shows that there's a misunderstanding, a misconception around what tariffs are. So I want to use ChatGPT today to quickly explain to you what tariffs are using an example from a country called Madagascar off of the eastern coast of Africa and a product known as vanilla, which is used often in baking, and talk about tariffs. So if you're involved, as many of us are these days, in conversations around tariffs, and you're talking to someone who clearly doesn't understand what a tariff is, share this link with them and hopefully it'll explain it. So Madagascar produces 70 to 80% of the global supply of vanilla. The US doesn't produce a lot of vanilla, if any vanilla whatsoever. So the US needs to find a country globally that produces vanilla. There are 4 or 5 of those, but Madagascar is the predominant manufacturer. So it has set up a trade agreement with Madagascar, between the US and Madagascar, and then within companies within the US and companies in or manufacturers in Madagascar to buy vanilla. It's agreed on a price, and it has agreed on trade terms, and every year when Madagascar produces vanilla, it then bottles it and exports it in whatever volume the US requests over to US companies, and those companies use it in products, and those products then get consumed by US consumers. That creates a trade surplus because Madagascar exports in dollar volume way more vanilla than it imports other goods. So what does Madagascar import? It imports things that it can't make or doesn't make or isn't cost effective to make in Madagascar. Pharmaceuticals, cereals, manufacturing equipment, nuclear reactors, aircraft, etc., in this list provided by ChatGPT. So that creates a trade imbalance, let's call it of $700 million in round numbers. So they export, let's say, 800 million of vanilla, but they only buy 100 million of goods. That leaves the difference as a trade surplus. The US is saying that countries with a trade surplus are taking advantage of them. There's really no taking advantage of the US happening in this example. The US is buying a product that they don't manufacture or can't cost effectively manufacture at home from a country where it is cost effectively manufactured and grown, and they're using it in products that are then sold to US consumers. Now, the tariff element to this comes in, and the administration decides to put on a 10% tariff, the reciprocal baseline tariff. What that does is it increases the cost of the vanilla being shipped from Madagascar to the US by 10%. And who pays for that? It's paid for by the companies in the US that are importing the vanilla. So Walmart and Costco and many other companies, but those 2 retailers, as an example, would import a significant amount of vanilla on an annual basis to then put on their shelves and sell to the US consumer. And the US consumer would use it in baking at home, and then they would consume the vanilla. The 10% increase is going to be passed on to the US consumer, either in whole or in part. Someone has to absorb the 10% increase in cost that's paid by the companies that import the product. So Walmart and Costco, as the 2 examples, could easily absorb, well, not easily, but they could absorb the cost. So they could decrease their margins by 10%, leave the price on the shelves of vanilla the same, but they would be losing 10%. And as a business, no business wants to lose money or decrease their margins. They always want to be increasing their margins, so they're likely to pass that cost on. Now, large companies like Costco and Walmart, who have extremely good buying power and relationships, they could say to the vanilla manufacturers that they buy from, we need you to absorb some of that 10% increase. They may have the power to do that. And so maybe the vanilla manufacturer absorbs 5%, but Costco and Walmart still have to absorb or pass on the other 5%. And that 5% or 10%, whatever it is that's being passed on, is paid for by the consumer. Now, that cost increase is known as inflation, and it's a hidden form of taxation. It's the most dangerous form of taxation because the money is really it's almost hidden in a way from the consumer because the consumer doesn't view it as a tax, but at the same time, the consumer, their income or their wage from the business or company they work for hasn't increased 10% to correlate to the 10% reciprocal tariffs across the board on all of these other products, vanilla and hundreds or thousands of others that have now increased 10%. So the cost of living has increased or will increase for the American consumer and other global consumers. And that will be a penalty, like a tax, to the US consumer. So tariffs, although that revenue does in the end get collected by business or by the government, it's still paid for by the citizen and the consumer. And that's who's going to feel the most amount of pain. Because as you're paying more as a consumer for goods, 10% more as a baseline case, you're going to have 10% less disposable income to spend on your wants, not your needs. I mean, vanilla as an input to a baking could be a need as opposed to a want. So you're not going to have as much money for wants like vacations or a new car or a meal out or a new piece of clothing or any of those things that aren't needs but are wants. And that aspect of things means that if you don't hold or own actual hard assets, things like gold or real estate that also appreciate in value, then you're actually losing money and are going to be further behind. So when you look at the demographic breakdown of most countries, but looking at the US, you have the top 20% who are the wealthiest. Then you have probably 40% who are in the middle class. So that takes you to 60. And then you have 40% in the low income class. So almost poverty, but scraping by, probably not even getting by. This is the class that's either needing government assistance, could be retired and doesn't have a huge pension income, or it could be that you're holding down 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. That class, that lower class, who doesn't own any property or tangible assets, is going to be the hardest hit. And tariffs will make the poorer much poorer. They will make the middle class, they'll keep the middle class where they are. They won't allow them to get wealthier. And they'll allow the top 20% to accumulate even more wealth because it's the top 20% who own stocks in the stock market. And those stocks in the stock market, although they've gone down in the last month or so, typically always go up on an overall basis if you look at it in the long term. And they hold, that 20% holds the wealth that's in the stock market that is growing. And that's the impact of tariffs and what tariffs are from an explanation standpoint, as well as trade surpluses and trade deficits. If you have questions like this, I'd encourage you to ask ChatGPT before just listening to the general media, which uses headlines to get eyeballs and attention, but it doesn't necessarily provide all of the details unless you read into what the article's actually about. And if we had more and more people looking into the details as opposed to just the headline, these misconceptions would start to go away. I hope this video helped. If it did, please subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who has questions about tariffs. And if you're interested in learning more about the market narrative, the stock market narrative, and increasing your own financial knowledge and know-how so that you can manage your money as opposed to allowing someone else to do it, who may really not be as knowledgeable as you think they might be or they should be in that business, then follow along and I'll try to give you some tips and tricks. Have a great day. Good luck with your trades, and I hope this video